at least 400 years of oppression is not accidental. Thousands of our ancestors facing multiple hyphenated storms is not accidental. Our choices in whether or not to make things better is not accidental. Peace is the presence of our ancestors before and after their bodies or ashes have reached the ground. Peace is their ability to ground us in order to face our present. They had to face their futures too. So do we. This is not to say that we can force the storm to calm its rain of tears or thunder rumbles of frustration. This is not to say shelter from the precipitation of new normals lacks isolation. Our ancestors have faced hardship in the winds and tear. We are allowed space for anger. But there were eyes in their hurricanes too. We are allowed space for uncertainty in the quiet. Sunlight and rainbows are bound to shy their way out. We are allowed space for joy. Whether you believe we're a bunch of accidents or purposes, we are meant to be grounded. We are meant to define our own peace.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are meant to be grounded. We are meant to define our own peace. Thank you so much for that beautiful opening, and what a joy it is to be with you all this afternoon. I was just saying, I am an IFYC alum. I first became involved with Interfaith Youth Corps when I was 17 years old, a senior in high school in Chicago. And today's conversation really feels like the culmination of dreams. At the time, I was one of the only African-American participants in the Chicago Youth Council. So to be able to facilitate a conversation with other IFYC alumni, all of whom are folks of color, really feels like it's blowing my mind in the best way. And to be able to share the genius of these incredible, incredible humans is wonderful. And so just deep gratitude to Interfaith Youth Corps, to the panelists that I will introduce in just a moment, and everyone for joining us today. We are gathered here to talk about composting religion. And I thought I would begin in celebration of my new book, To My Beloveds, Letters on Race, Faith, Loss, and Radical Hope, by doing a short reading that I think really encapsulates some of the energy and the impetus for this conversation. It's from a letter titled Composting Religion, a letter to spiritual leaders on the edge. And it says, I am writing this letter to you, my fellow spiritual misfit, so that you know in no uncertain terms that you are not alone in your quest for understanding your place in the world as it is evolving. At times, it may feel like the earth is literally moving under your feet as you attempt to step in one direction or the other. That's because it is. All around us, things are shifting, systems are collapsing, and institutions are failing. This should not surprise us. Around the world, elders across cultures and people were predicting this time would come. It is a time of great uncovering in which Mother Earth and Father Sky are pushing us into a divine reckoning about what it means to be in right relationship with one another and all sentient beings in the 21st century and beyond. It is clear to me the actions we take now will have a deep and irreversible consequences for the generations to come. The good news is this is a time made for misfits. When you are at the center of a circle, it is impossible to see what is at the perimeter, even if you are even aware there is a perimeter. As misfits who are pushed to the edge and in between places, we are able to see what is on the horizon and collectively discern what is needed to meet the challenges ahead. We are called to be the gardeners who will compost and tend to the soil upon which future generations will sow seeds that will one day blossom. Those of us who are embedded within spiritual communities understand that there are roles within our religious communities that no longer serve us and fail to speak to the material conditions that shape the lives of our people. We cannot program our way out of crisis. No single curriculum will reverse the impact of climate change and poverty and heal more than 4 centuries of racial injustice in the United States. For far too long, we believed that the insidious lie that innovation is the domain of those with the power and social status to determine what models are worthy of our attention and praise. The enormity of the plight we face can only be solved by harnessing the ingenuity and creativity of the communities to which we belong and are accountable. The season will require us to recover ancestral wisdom and practices that we lost or undervalued, repair the deep breaches in our interpersonal and communal relationships that replicate patterns of harm and destruction, and reimagine the possible by stretching ourselves to see beyond the realities of our current circumstances and daring to dream something different into being. I am so honored today that I get to talk to a collection of incredible Interfaith Youth Corps alums who are dreaming new things into the possible. Folks who, like me, have been perhaps spiritual misfits on the edge, but who, through their very life and vocational choices, are blazing a path forward. And so it's my honor to welcome to the stage Tyler, Mia, Maya, and Harmeet to have this incredible conversation that I know is gonna be just the best. So can y'all come to the stage? It's so good to see your faces. Hey, y'all. What a gift, what a gift, what a gift it is to be in conversation with you all today. I am just so honored to get to be the steward of this conversation, but we are going to be talking to each other, which is just the joy. So don't feel like you need to answer each question one by one, but that this is a conversation that we will dig into together. So my first question for you, incredible spiritual innovators, is this. We're living in a time of great social upheaval and instability. And I'm curious for you, what rituals, practices, and traditions do you think we ought carry forth to help us meet the urgency of this moment, especially given the context in which we're living in, when so many people are living with a deep sense of loss and grief? So I'm going to ask Mia to kick it off.
Well, I would be honored. Hello, Jen, and hello, everyone. What a super rich question. I am a development specialist at the Highlander Research and Education Center. And so a big part of my work is reimagining how we fundraise for the things we care about, how we fundraise to take care of other people. And in that thinking, I've been fortunate enough to bring a lot of my personal rituals forward. So I try to read a poem by June Jordan or Nicholas Garcia, or, you know, a poet that I feel like really brings a screwdriver to this world of loose screws every day. That's definitely a practice that I have held on to. But in also the same spirit, one of my favorite quotes that came out of the last year was the Utah Poet Laureate said, "I'm tired of people asking what poems can do for people. The answer is nothing. The answer is that poems are a screwdriver. They are a tool that help you articulate yourself around the world." So I know that I can't just read the poem. I have to go out and do. I have to go out and help. So I also am regularly giving to mutual aid networks as well in my community. I regularly give to the Metro Atlanta Mutual Aid Fund. And I also am someone who participates in Project South programming here in Atlanta. So my rituals are that I continue to feed myself with art, water myself with art, and try to continue to water my community with the art and material support that I can offer in this time of grief.
Beautiful. Maya, I'm sensing some resonance and you're snapping. Do you want to affirm?
Like it was, yes, Mia, what you said, it was so good. It was so good. Like in the in my religious tradition of Christianity, in the book of James, it talks about how faith without works is dead. And therefore I just I resonated with what you were saying, because like yes, prayers are great. Prayers feel great. I myself like to write my prayers because they help me process more connection that way for me personally. And also my therapist has been like, "Have you been writing your prayers today?" I'm like, so shout out to therapists with who use an interfaith lens in their work, but also like you need to put in the work as well. I make sure to put in the work, making sure my art is of service. I put in the work when facilitating peer support groups for transgender survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. There's I put in being of use and of service to my family. Right now, being a caregiver for my partner's family, who is also my family, going through a time of grief. So, yeah, I just really appreciate you, Mia, for reflecting that. And also, I know that like you were brought up in a Baptist household, and it's always beautiful to me how you hold that as a Buddhist. And also thank you for bearing with all my text messages of reading this book called Grieving While Black that's written by a Black Buddhist scholar who was raised in a Southern Baptist tradition. So I'm like, Mia would appreciate this.
I don't know if y'all can tell, Maya is my best friend. We go way back. So I don't know if the bond is apparent, but Maya is my best friend. Shout out to Black femme therapists. Shout out to Black people who are always willing to share what books they're reading and how they're grieving and how they're holding space. But big love to you, Maya. Always good to see you.
I am really inspired by both Mia and Maya bringing up the arts as a motivator, as a driver of their spiritual practices. I know storytelling for many oppressed communities is a huge part of the movement towards liberation and that journey together. I think one thing that has sustained me, especially in the last several years, is looking back and preserving my community's histories. And that's been a huge source of life for me. And you know, in November every year, the Sikh community observes Bandi Chhod Divas, which happens on the day of Diwali. And I was actually thinking recently about how energizing looking back on the history and meaning of this day for my community is. Like Guru Har Gobind was offered release from his imprisonment, but refused it unless he was able to free all of the other political prisoners who were being held with them. So that, that preservation of our history and the call to collective liberation, the blueprint is there in the tradition. And I think it's easy for us to forget, to move away from it, to try and root around for answers elsewhere, but the answers are there. And I think especially for oppressed communities, like the Sikh community, we're marginalized all over the world, being able to preserve those histories is important for our survival.
Just want to say I'm like in deep appreciation for not only all that you all do, but for like your very being. To be in this space on this planet in this complicated near trash moment. Just thank you so much for incarnating in this moment. I'm deeply appreciative. And so the thing that comes to me in this question, and everyone has already mentioned it really, is I'm thinking about my own spiritual journey as someone who dances on the edges of multiple traditions, right? Raised and baptized in the Disciples of Christ Christian tradition, came to Wicca and eventually becoming an initiate of British traditional Wicca and an ordained minister in Unitarian Universalism. So I'm holding all of these traditions. Is this understanding of reclaiming and reimagining rituals and practices. I grew up in a culture in Southwest Virginia, in families where we truly did have praying grandmothers, right? Like having a grandmother who prayed over you was something that was normal, right? And there are moments in my life now when things get really hard and, I'm calling up a grandmother and saying, Mama B, will you pray for me? Because stuff is hard, right? And part of this practice of reclaiming and reimagining religion, as your text says, Jen, about composting religion, is understanding spirituality and religion as something that urges us, inspires us, and sometimes pulls us towards liberation in this generation, not something that is far off or far away, but something that can be tangible right here, right now. And as Harmeet said, like all of our traditions speak to this in some way, shape, or form. I think of Jesus was killed by the police state, right? Like we can't get away from that. And if you do, well, then what is happening? We must investigate this. And this is true for so many of the world's religions when they tell us and talk to us about freedom, when they talk to us about liberation. This is not just a theoretical concept, it is a lived, fleshy, tangible reality.
I'm seeing lots of deep nods and like resonances happening on the screen. So I'm curious, y'all, it's interesting. So so often when we talk about millennials or Gen Zers, there's like a lot of anxiety around how folks think we're leaving institutional religion. And so one of the things that's super inspiring for me to hear reflected back in your responses just now is how deeply grounded and rooted you all are in your traditions and whatever, in lineages. And I say lineages plural because they are inspired, it sounds like, from a variety of different places and spaces and social locations that inform what you do. So I'm curious that in the same way that there are things that we hold on to, I often am fond of saying, like, I stay Christian and in the AME church, my denomination, because like the same God that got my great-great-grandmother through the realities and horror of Jim and Jane Crow is the same God that I see alive and at work, even in the midst of the darkness of this moment. And talk about this a little bit in the book. So much of my life was shaped by these church women, Black women in their 60s and 70s and 80s who had lived through some things, who taught me the meaning of resilience, taught me the meaning of ingenuity, even though they didn't have formal spiritual leadership. They also taught me some stuff I needed to let go of around the way, around gender roles and the performance of gender and sexuality. And so, and I count that as part of my tradition, right? And some stuff I got to work through. Good therapy helps, but also, so I'm curious for you all, in the same way that you are carrying forth so beautifully these lineages of which you claim ancestry and authority. I hear authority being claimed in them, which is beautiful. I'm wondering, what are some things that we might need to let go of from your perspective as you think about this notion of composting being literally taking that which is dead to nourish new life? I'm a big believer that some stuff needs to stay dead and to the side. So I'm curious for you all, what are some of the things that you find yourself wanting to, or in your lived reaction and practice, release? Maybe that's a better way to put it, release.
I'd like to speak first, if that's okay. We really need to let go of this sense of obligation that isn't serving us. Like Jen, you had written in your book about the elder Black women that you've learned from, and there's a quote from your book where it says, "Yet even now she rarely complains. For the life of me, I cannot figure out if this trait is a virtue or a hindrance." Because on one end, the CDC has named that that Black people are the racial group with the least amount of suicides in their community, and they cite that with religious collaboration, right? And on one end, it's like, that's cool. And at the same time, it's like, how many of my Black siblings are pressured into staying alive? How many Black siblings have expressed suicidal ideation and yet are told, like, no, just pray about it. As in, talk to God about it. Don't talk to me about it. Talk to God about it. Because I can't handle this right now. Like, letting go of this sense of obligation that isn't serving us in a way where it's like, because and again, in your book, you talk about how you chose to stay alive for your loved ones, and that is such a beautiful thing. And I don't want people to let go of that or view that as a bad thing. And I want people, more of us, to be bold in this move to stay alive for ourselves too. We have a right to ourselves as well. So we really need to let go of obligation, because, like, yes, these obligations have been keeping us alive, but at what cost?
Thank you, Maya. And for folks who are attending, Maya's referencing a letter in my book that I wrote to Marshawn McCarroll, who was an activist in the Black Lives Matter movement who died by suicide. And in it, I talk about a lot of my friends and loved ones who have struggled with depression and suicidal ideation, including myself and my mom and others. And that in particular, I think there's a way in which that gets invisibilized in communities of color for just the thing you're talking about, Maya. Thank you so much. Other folks, what we gotta let go of?
I think I personally am trying to let go of my shame for the ways that I feel or the ways that I'm suffering. One beautiful thing that came out of 2020, this very hard time, was that Maya and I started Dying Laughing, which is a video essay series on the representation of suicidal ideation in entertainment media. And, you know, that initiative was born out of conversations that Maya and I had, where we were saying, like, we're feeling really guilty, like we're feeling really bad about the fact that we are so sad, that everything seems to be felt so much more intensely this year, and that we're grieving almost in a society that urges us to isolate and to reflect rather than to come together and heal in community. And so Maya will remember this, but Laverne Cox visited our university when we were, young. And one of my favorite things that she says is there is a very clear difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is I have done something wrong. Shame is I am something wrong. And that's the thing I want to let go of, is that no, it's not wrong of me to feel the way I'm feeling, because it's a natural reaction to the way the world is moving right now. I have gotten a lot of very keen Buddhist lessons in impermanence in the last year, in just letting things go, in letting myself feel sad and then let that go, to feel that weight and then to release it. I'll say this last thing and then I'll move it to someone else. I played basketball for 9 years of my life. So my knees sound like snap, crackle, pop anywhere I go. But my father put me through an exercise once where he was, having me dribble a basketball, and he was just feeding me more and more basketballs, like as I was, trying to dribble and trying to develop my hand-eye coordination. And so I think I got up to like 4, and I got super overwhelmed because, you're bouncing 4 basketballs at a time. And he said, after we were done, he said, it never occurred to you to take them one at a time. It never occurred to you to put this thing down, like to try to have them one at a time. And I said, well, yeah, but I thought you'd be disappointed in me. And he was like, well, what do you mean? Like, we're supposed to be helping you. Like, I'm supposed to be teaching you something. So if you are getting overwhelmed, right? Like, don't feel that shame, feel it, but then let it go. Feel it and let it motivate you to do what's right for you. So.
Wow, thank y'all so much. So there's like a litany of things that literally just like came to mind, right? And the most poignant thing is inspired by one of James Baldwin's quotes about the usefulness of God, right? And if God is not useful, if God is not helpful, we need to give up God, or at least that God, or that understanding of God. And I think in the last 10 years, I have been breaking up with the death dealing God, right? This God that talks about like needing to overfunction, needing to worry about these traditions as they have been handed it to me. This thing about needing to perform, and the very small conceptions of the cosmos, right? We are indeed star beings. We are wild and we are free, and we drink of the cup of mystery. Like, that is beautiful and that is holy. And if our traditions that have been handed to us are small and narrow and death dealing, forget them. Let them go. And I'm living into that, right?
Wow, I'm feeling so energized by all that you have shared, all of you. It's so rich, and I'm sighing because I'm letting my body absorb and process all of it. It feels so beautiful.
Good for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maya. I think often about needing to let go of the desire to assimilate, to fit into a dominant narrative of who I should be, what I should be practicing, how I should be practicing, how I should be seeing myself and others in our society. Like, I come from a tradition that is anti-state, it's anti-capitalist, it's anti-caste, you know, it's my tradition is built to empower the most oppressed people in our society, and yet as an oppressed community scattered across the globe, you know, we feel pressure, and oftentimes, you know, it's legitimate pressure because it's life or death, but we feel pressure that we have to view our ultimate reality, our divine ultimate, in a specific, very Christian-centric way, or that we need to fit into Eurocentric conceptions of gender and class. But that's not serving us, because that's moving us farther away. You know, for me, for so much of my life, I felt so far away from my tradition, from my community, from our history, because I was being pulled away from it through all of these societal expectations and norms. But once I was able to uncover for myself, you know, what's actually at the root of my traditions, what am I emerging out of in reality, it's something that is so beautifully unique and so celebratory of each individual's agency and precious value, that being able to go back to that, and then also living into my own gender as a trans non-binary person, who, you know, shows up for my caste oppressed siblings, who shows up for folks who are trans in my community. Like, that has been so life-giving for me that it feels like there is no other option at this point but to throw all the rest of it away.
My tradition, that is what we call an amen moment, or like we would start rocking back and forth if there was a preacher preaching and saying, yes, that's good. Keep going, right? Preach on. So thank you all. I just want to say to folks who are listening into this beautiful conversation, if you have questions, you can share those in the chat box or with the Q&A function. I got more questions, but would love to hear from folks in the audience what they're sitting with or what questions they might be asking. So y'all, so part of the beautiful thing about composting is that it's about nourishing something that wants to emerge. And so I'm so curious, from your vantage point and where you're sitting, what new innovations are you already seeding, or might we seed, that can help us craft a new way forward? Because what we're learning in these times is that the way we've been doing things is not going to work or sustain us long term. And so I'd love to hear from your experience, either work that you're doing, again, thinking about innovation, like I wrote in the book, not as like the fancy, sexy approved thing, but like really pulling from the wisdom of your communities and the work and just your way of knowing to help see the continuation. Maybe that's what I'll call it, traditioned innovation, right? Like it's grounded in something and rooted in something. So I'm so curious, and I know folks are anxious to hear about some of the work that you've been up to, or things that in your imagination are taking shape right now that you might want to seed moving forward.
I will start, I guess, on this one. And the first thing that came to mind was movement chaplaincy, which is like not surprising at all that I would go there, but exactly where I go there. And for those who might not know, thanks. And shout out to my elders who are on here and beyond the screens, who helped me claim this identity and sharpen my herb basket and the tools inside that basket. As I define it, movement chaplaincy is where we bring the wisdom of our traditions and the legacies in which we have inherited or claimed, and bring them into movement space as we work to get free, right? So that's how I understand movement chaplaincy. And some of the things that I've been like, that feels right, which are not new in any way, shape, or form. Like, end note, is altar building is imperative, right? And I think about that because I'm sitting in my dining room, and there's my dining room table, and there's my ancestral altar, which I have just finished praying in front of for 4 nights in a row to pray up my ancestors in this moment, and how those all come together. And being very intentional that my ancestral altar is in my dining room, because gathering together to eat is sacred and holy. it is sacred and holy, like nourishing the body, nourishing the soul, nourishing the mind for the long, hard nights that might be ahead. It's super magical, and it's not new in any way, shape, or form, but it is a reclaiming and a reminding of myself that I'm just like, oh yeah, this is it. And it ain't going to church necessarily for me at 10:30 every Sunday, because sometimes church is useless.
I know that the poet laureate of Portland, Maine probably should have something to say about this. So I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to go ahead and throw it over there.
Thank you, Mia. Because I will say, so I moved to Maine from North Carolina. I moved from a place that was predominantly Christian, and had more Black people, and then moved to a predominantly non-religious area with a lot of white people, and then on Sunday mornings, I created a writing workshop for folks to join. We would meet at this queer-owned space called Quill Books and Beverage in Westbrook, Maine. Since COVID, we've been online. And the owner had a baby in July, so we're like, please take your time. Don't feel like you got to open up soon. And what's fascinating about this space has been like, we have been able to talk about our collective traumas through our writing, our trauma when it comes to class, when it comes to race, because there are people of color who find comfort that I'm facilitating that space, or we talk about religious trauma a lot. And a lot of the folks in the group are white queer folks with trauma with the Catholic Church, and they have either left that space for a new worldview, or they don't identify with a worldview at all, and they're able to process that in ways they're unable to process that before. Or I'm able to process the complexities of my own religious identity and mental health. So then what ended up happening was, all of a sudden the participants are saying, we're going to church. And I'm like, okay. Because in my mind, I'm like, I never said that out loud. I don't want to put people in words' mouths. I don't want to take up space as a Christian, but like, no, people have been like, we're here at church this morning. And I find that very, very beautiful, actually. And it makes me proud that folks want to come to that cultivated space. And it makes me happy that they're calling it that and not me. So thank you, Mia, for going like, you have something to say, now say it.
Thank you all so much for those. I'm so heartened by all of the newness that I'm seeing. I think I really echo Jen's remarks at the beginning of our hour that like the future of these movement spaces and folks doing this important interfaith work is good and it's secure. I'm so excited to be here. But to answer your question, Jen, I have been really invested in storytelling through research. I'm a graduate researcher at Union Seminary in New York City. And my main commitment through that research has been to either construct or reconstruct what my tradition and other South Asian traditions and communities have to say about collective liberation, particularly from white supremacist capitalist structures. So whether that's digging deep into our communal trauma to try and find some source of healing so that we can collaborate together more fully, more compassionately, or if it's theologizing socialist sick theology that's emerging out of the ongoing farmers' protest happening in India right now. And please lift up those farmers who have been protesting on the ground for almost a year now. you know, that work is important because we're bringing to the fore the issues that started our community in the first place, like our gurus and their companions and our martyrs and our saints. They were, you know, this tradition emerged from their lived experiences of bearing witness to and being survivors of oppression at the hands of the state. So being able to reconstruct that in an academic space has been really fulfilling for me, and I hope for others. I also want to give a huge shout out to other queer and trans Sikhs across the world who are working together to construct a queer Sikh theology. And the fact that storytelling and this kind of reconstruction, this reemergence, this constructive work can happen in a variety of different ways, right? Like the academic space is not the only way to do it. I would even go as far as to say you probably shouldn't do it in an academic space. But the arts, as we have all talked about in our various textures, have been so central for me. One of my most prized projects at IFYC as an alum has been a zine that I published called Faith in Full Color, that is uplifting the perspectives of artists of marginalized identities and how their faith speaks to social issues. And it is just an incredible, it always comes together as an incredible conglomeration of perspectives and constructive dialogue.
It's beautiful. As we continue to sit with this question, we have some questions coming through in the chat that I want to share with you all, which is awesome. So I'm just going to name two of the questions that are coming through. If there's one that's resonating more with you, please feel free to pick up on it. My friend Adina is on. Hey, Adina. Adina's question is for Harmeet about Adina is also working on community history and is curious about specific methodologies that you're using for documenting community history. We have a question from Lawrence Whitney. What do you need from those in your orbit and your network and your tribe and your community in order to grow and thrive in your emerging spirituality? What forms and styles and practices of care do you receive from others that are empowering and life-giving and nurturing? Another question we have, you all live in diverse metro areas. I think that's true. I don't know. Is everybody in a diverse metro area? Yeah, I think so. So for people who are not rooted in urban areas, who are struggling with finding community outside, how do you connect and reach to people who are going through the same composting? So all of you should be able to see these two in the Q&A function, but if there's a question that's really resonating with you, folks are, they want to hear from y'all. So I'm gonna be quiet so you can answer.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple of different things that I have tried to do in the last year, like projects that I've tried to bring to the fore in the last year to actualize my spirituality. And I found that I am consistently led to popular education. I'm consistently led to specifically popular political education. In this current moment, I have been challenging not only my faith communities, but my family members, my friends, to reconsider the ways that capitalism has reproduced hierarchy in our relationships and has forced us to place ourselves on the bottom of that hierarchy and to put our faith even above ourselves as a thing that we hold out from us rather than see as integral to the way that we see the world. There's a really cool book by Dr. Rima Vaseli-Flad, who's the director of Peace and Justice Studies at Warren Wilson. It's called Black Buddhists and the Black Radical Tradition. And she talks about how Black Buddhists have a different orientation to Buddhism because of our focus on community values and our focus on honoring our ancestry. And so kind of through that vein, last year, I started curating a revolutionary reading library during the uprising. I started teaching popular education courses on the history of Black Marxism, the history of Black socialism. I wanted to give my people some hand and toe holds to talk through, to reimagine a new tomorrow.
And they're so good at it.
I also wanted to, I love you, Maya. I also wanted to like do that because my own grandmother, like, was a union steward at an aluminum factory in Eastern North Carolina. Like, my history is advocating for those who are oppressed, not only by class status, but also by race and religious identification as well. So that's the biggest thing. I'm currently teaching with Southern Movement Assembly right now during their Hot Damn Decolonization, Abolition, and Mutual Aid series, which is so much fun and really filling me up as a Buddhist. But I guess to kind of like wrap it back around to that last question, which is like, what do you need from people, is what I heard to like feel affirmed in the formulating spirituality. And also, if you're a rural person, how do you get involved? I think I want to fold both of those into each other, because James Baldwin says, right, and I'm paraphrasing this quote, but he says, you believe that you're alone in the world, and then you read. And so the way that I came to Buddhism actually was through Living Buddha, Living Christ, which is a text that's written by Thich Nhat Hanh. But I came to Buddhism because I was lost in my life, and I felt like I needed someone to make sense of what I was feeling, this nature of being adrift. And because I was young, I turned to books, but now we live in the time where there are blogs, there are series like Maya's and mine that talk about our interfaith experience with suicide. There is any number of way to connect and way to be in community. And so what I want for people and from people is to lean into being in community without the expectation of reciprocity, lean into being in community and listening and simply existing in spaces with other people, and bring what you have. If you, I will tell this very brief aside, and then I will throw it back. But I took a workshop with Denise Frohman not long ago. Denise Frohman is a Puerto Rican poet, activist, artist, and she said, when I was in Puerto Rico during the protests, these women who were living in the villages, they would come out and they didn't have anything to protest with. They didn't have, megaphones or big banners or anything. So they brought their pots and pans from their kitchen, and they were running through the streets, like banging pots and pans and screaming their message. And Denise said, that taught me that I just need to bring what I have and hope that that's enough. I need to bring what I have and hope that people will receive it. So that's the answer to both of those questions, I think, for me, is bring what you have, and don't be afraid to bring that and to lean into it, because there are people out there who want to fill your toolbox in the same way that you want them to fill yours.
Bring what you got. I think we have time for one more answer. If somebody is like, is there something that's burning or you want to share before we make a little bit of a pivot? Who else has brilliance that they want to drop on folks real quick?
I will say this brief aside, this idea around like, the only way we could serve folks in rural communities is just simply bringing them to an urban community, bring them to the city, is not cute. That's not cute. That's not helpful. That's not necessary. There have been so many movements that started in rural areas, and because there are rural areas that where there are people who know each other, that has been such a useful facet of organizing, and that could be learned a lot from rural areas around using the knowledge of like who knows who, and that has been great safety planning for queer and trans folks as well. Especially the ones I've worked with in the mid coast of Maine, that is more rural than where I usually live in Portland, Maine. So it's I would love to focus more on what we can learn from rural areas as well. And I'm grateful that we do have the internet, that so that folks in rural areas do have more access, but at the same time, not everyone has internet access. So how can we establish them in libraries? How can we establish more in-person connections that isn't like, oh, just take a bus to the city? 'Cause that's not cute.
And I just, to sharpen that, even in my own context, because I'm unapologetically a Southerner, a queer Black Southerner from Appalachia. I just want to say that. The rural South was the place in which the recipe for liberation in what is now named the United States started, right? So don't sleep on the rural South, right? I'm thinking about all of the mountain folk, the indigenous folk, the enslaved Africans who were brought here, particularly in what is now the South. Like the playbook for us getting free started to be uttered and was received here, right? And so let's hold that, right? And I think of all of these small, like, communal housing programs and co-ops and training centers and the places where people go out deep into the woods and utter odd chants and dance under the full moon. So many of the great and beautiful and wonderful things are all in the rural South.
Well, with that mic drop, and as somebody whose people come from the rural South in Southern Georgia and Arkansas and Northern Florida, I am just so grateful for the conversation. I can't believe it's almost like this is the beginning of a conversation is what I will say. But I actually want to invite Mia to kind of put a bow on this part of our conversation by sharing some of their brilliance in a poem.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you all for sharing this. I love you, Maya. Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you all for sharing this space. I was a graduate student at Florida State University in 2019, which was its own form of trauma. But during that year, something odd happened on the news, and I just had to write about it. So I'm going to share the poem that I wrote about that odd happening. On December 17th, 2019, performance artist David DeTuna entered the Art Basel Miami exhibition, removed an artwork worth $100,000 from the gallery wall, and ate it. This is an ode to the hungry artist, the parable of the Great Banquet. Mere days after we paid our respects to Chairman Fred, we sat on the stoop slack-jawed as a man ate a $120,000 banana. Sucked our teeth and mused that the hunger's gonna kill us first. 60-second science class at the self-checkout. Appetite, like energy, cannot be lost, only change its form. So when my stomach, I mean pockets, are empty, I bite the Armani-gloved hand that feeds me. Question: if the ancestors were sharecroppers living in Eden on credit, what was the price of the apple? Question: if we still have not tired of tilling the fields without tasting the fruit, what is the value of our heads? In the year of our Lord 2019, Jesus walks into a brightly colored spectacle, peels forbidden yield, lets teeth break skin into bleeding, performs a miracle, then smiles as the centurions lead him away from shocked public. Peace so still, it shows the cruelty in starving, commands its witnesses to go forth, multiply. Thank you so much, Jen, for having me. This has been so wonderful.
Thank you for that benediction blessing. And I am now in my mid-30s, and I feel like, in the words of Kendra Kumar, with folks like you, we gonna be all right. And I can rest comfortably into my auntie-hood, knowing that there is this rad generation that's going to keep being my teachers and keep pushing me and keep pushing all of us towards a vision of deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper visions of liberation and freedom and care in the world. And so deep growl of gratitude to your yes, not just for this conversation, but your yes to pursuing with a voracious and hunger that which you have been called and put on this earth to do. And so thank you for your yes. Thank you for your yes. And thank you to everybody who was able to listen in to this conversation. If you're like me, I'm just going to be, speaking of feasting off of it in my spirit and my prayer life and in all ways. For the rest of the week and into the future, just abundant wisdom that was shared here. So thank you all for being so deeply in tune with lineage and so deeply in tune with yourselves.